considering the very important region of our body, which is the cerebral cortex. So we're going to look at the different lobes of the cerebral cortex in this video. So beginning with, let us first try to understand what the cerebral cortex is all about. The cerebral cortex is basically the most prominent region of the mammalian brain. So that is one region that kind of distinguishes us from the other, species around us. So that is one important point. The next thing is the cells of the cerebral cortex are obviously the gray matter and then the white matter. Gray matter consists of a rich collection of neurons and their fibers. Extension is basically the white matter. The cerebral cortex is divided into the right and the left hemisphere, and each of these hemispheres, the right and the left, communicate to each other through the corpus callosum and the anterior commissure, which basically allows you to integrate information from the left and the right hemispheres, and that's how we are able to function in an integrated manner, irrespective of the fact that our hemispheres have been divided into the right and the left. Now, let's get into understanding the different lobes of the cerebral cortex. So, beginning with the occipital lobe. The occipital lobe is basically located at the posterior end, as you can see in the rear end, back end of the cerebral cortex. So, this region is predominantly very important for processing visual information. So, the posterior pole of the occipital lobe is called as the striate cortex or the primary visual cortex. So if there is a damage in this region, you will not be able to mentally visualize any visual stimulus. So that is one thing that happens when there is a damage. So basically we try to understand the human brain not by dissecting human beings and trying to figure out what happens if you damage one part and remove another part. You really can't do that. So we try to understand the human brain through different animal studies as well as through brain damage patients. So such studies have kind of revealed that when there is a damage in the primary visual cortex, it is noticed that you might suffer cortical blindness. So cortical blindness as in you're unable to actually perceive visual information. So which means your sensory receptors in your eyes, all of that is fine and intact, but still you will not be able to see. So which means the entire process of perception is different from sensation. Sensation is the sensation of the stimulus. All right, so that is sensation. Perception only allows you to actually feel and experience that external visual body, and it allows you to tell whether it's a watch, whether it's a wall, whether it's a window. All of that happens because of this entire thing of perception, and the entire perception component of the visual stimulus basically happens in the primary visual cortex. So if there is a damage in the primary visual cortex, the person is unable to be able to perceive any visual object, which means the person is actually blind. But another important thing that you need to know is, say you are born perfectly with good eyesight, and over the years, say you lose your eyesight because of damage, like an injury, or say there is a damage, there is a disease, or some kind of accident, and then you lose your eyesight. So in such situations, what really happens is you can still perceive visual stimuluses because of your primary visual cortex, because though you're not able to see certain things, you can imagine them, you can have dreams, all of that is possible. But for a person who has a damage in the primary visual cortex, that is also not possible. So the end of story, the entire visual scenes that you actually see in your dreams, and your ability to, for example, if I tell you eclairs, and you can actually see that eclairs chocolate in your mind, or a donut, and then the donut pops up in your mind, all of that is because of your primary visual cortex. So that's about the occipital lobe. The next lobe that we're going to consider is the parietal lobe. The parietal lobe basically lies just in between the occipital and the central sulcus. So the central sulcus is the deepest groove in the cortex. So that is one thing that you need to know. The next thing about the parietal lobe is there are different distinct parts in the parietal lobe that are of significant importance. So the first thing that we're going to try to understand is the post-central gyrus or the primary somatosensory cortex. So this is a very important region that is actually located in the parietal lobe. So this particular region allows you to process sensory information from different parts of your body. So basically there are 4 bands of cells in this particular region that processes different kinds of information. So 2 bands processes light touch, 1 band processes deep pressure, another band processes a combination of both. So basically this particular region is very important to process different sensory information. Also, another thing that you need to know about the parietal lobe is it helps you monitor movement and positioning. So which means it allows your brain to know that you're in a certain position, your hands are in a certain position, your eyes are looking at a certain place, and it allows you to have movements, have appropriate movements by communicating such perceptions to the respective brain areas. So all of this is done in the parietal lobe. The next region that we're going to look at is the temporal lobe. The temporal lobe is a major region for auditory information. So this particular region helps you understand spoken language. It also has other aspects to it. For example, vision. It also helps you to comprehend complex or abstract visual designs and patterns, like an abstract image or an abstract painting. Okay, so that's another thing that it allows you to do. This particular region is also involved in motivated behaviors. It is also involved in your ability to experience different emotions. So that is with regards to temporal lobe. It is noticed that individuals who have damage to the temporal lobe tend to have a syndrome called Kluver-Bucy syndrome. So in this syndrome is basically a group of symptoms. So a person with the temporal lobe damage tends to have a group of varied symptoms, like they might have inappropriate responses. That is, they may not fear stimuluses that are actually fearful and threatening, for example, a snake or a fire. All right. They may have inappropriate anger responses. They might have inappropriate sexual behavior. So all of these are few important things of Kluver-Bucy syndrome, so which is actually noticed in a person with the temporal lobe damage. So tumor also in the temporal lobe causes visual and auditory hallucinations. So this is a very important key feature. So tumors, so when there is a tumor, you tend to have auditory and visual hallucinations. So what are these hallucinations all about? Hallucinations is basically you being able to perceive a certain sensory stimulus, say for example an image or an audio, when such a stimulus is actually not present. So that is basically temporal lobes, one of the major functions. I mean, one of the major deficit if there is a tumor. Okay, so basically it is noticed that this particular aspect of hallucination is a symptom in certain psychiatric conditions like schizophrenia. So a person with a psychiatric condition having the symptom of hallucinations tends to have hyperactivity in the temporal lobes, indicating of hallucinations. So this is another thing that you need to know about the temporal lobe. The next thing that we're going to know is that's the frontal lobe, the next part. So basically the frontal lobe is the major region of the of the entire human brain, I would say. That's with regards to my perception, because it allows you to reason effectively, it allows you to plan, it has all the executive functions, it allows you to be in the here and now. Like right now, if you're able to listen to me, process the information, reason out, all of that is because of the frontal lobe. The frontal lobe also has certain important parts to it, which is the primary motor cortex as well as the prefrontal cortex. And a few other important things about these regions is what we're going to discuss about. The primary motor cortex is also called as the precentral gyrus. So this particular region controls fine movements. So right now, if you're able to just lift your pointer finger and drop it down, okay, that's because of the precentral gyrus. That is because of the activity and the fine intact region of the precentral gyrus. Okay, so it controls certain minute fine motor movements. That is one thing. It also controls functions on movement basically on the contralateral or ipsilateral side of the body, majority in the contralateral and partially in the ipsilateral. So contralateral as in the opposite, ipsilateral as in the same. So which means the precentral gyrus kind of controls motor movements. That is, the left hemisphere's precentral gyrus might contribute to motor movements on the right, mostly, which is contralateral, or on the same side, that is the left, which is ipsilateral. So that is another important thing about the frontal lobe and the precentral gyrus. Then we are looking at the prefrontal cortex. So when we're looking at the prefrontal cortex, it is the most anterior region, that is the most frontmost region of the entire frontal lobe. So I was talking to you at the beginning of the frontal lobe about the whole idea that the frontal lobe is responsible for reasoning, problem solving, and all varied executive functions. All of that is centered down in the PFC, which is the prefrontal cortex. So it basically integrates a lot of information that is sent to the human brain and allows you to function in the here and now. So that's it for today, girls. So I hope you all understood the whole idea of the frontal lobe, the parietal lobe, the temporal lobe, and the varied other lobes of the human brain. And I hope this video was quite informative for you. Thank you.